You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific. And how?
Ryan returns this episode, thus the title, and is being held against his will at the Summerholt Neurological Institute in Metropolis, where Dr. Garner is running experiments on him to test the levels of his empathic abilities, and one might assume he's attempting to learn how to replicate based on the conspicuously green fluid we see hanging by his bed and that Garner injects into him when he tries to call for help. We're never told that's kryptonite, and it doesn't enhance Ryan's ability or give him any new ones, but toward the end of the episode we learn that Ryan has a tumor in his brain that gives him his ability, a la John Travolta in Phenomenon, and that Garner's experiments are growing the tumor at an exponential rate, which is why he keeps getting pressure headaches and nosebleeds whenever he concentrates too hard or when there are too many minds around that he can read. Summerholt swears they don't keep patients, but Clark doesn't believe them. He finds Ryan hid away in their facility and breaks him out. It's funny that the police apparently looked for Ryan there twice, but they don't have Clark's uncharacteristically keen observation, as all he has to do is glance at a piece of paper on a desk with a list of the facility's levels and see that one of them says restricted in red. The children of Metropolis can rest easy tonight, folks. But this isn't a simple case of saving a kid from the bad guys. Turns out Garner is Ryan's legal guardian, and that means Clark can be prosecuted for kidnapping. He's scolded by Jonathan for being so rash. This guy might have been mistreating Ryan, but if Clark can't prove it, he's just made things a lot more complicated by breaking the law himself and risking going to a juvenile detention center. He also gets Lex in the middle of his mess by taking Ryan to the mansion, and because Clark is trying to protect Ryan's secret, considering every time someone finds out they take advantage of him somehow, Lex doesn't even know why Clark had to break this kid out and just has to take his word that he was being mistreated. Fortunately, Lex saves the day when he shows up with a restraining order against Garner that gives the Kents temporary custody of Ryan based on suspicions that Garner did secret experiments on Ryan against his will. There are two subplots going on during all of this, something with Lex and Mayor Cigarette Smoking Man about Lex's plant trying to expand but being blocked by the zoning commission, and the mayor wanting a bribe to make it go away to help with his re-election campaign. By the end, Lex puts his support behind Mayor Tate's opponent, saying Smallville needs an honest mayor, and says he's even willing to give up the plant expansion just to get Tate out. The other subplot involves Nell trying to force Lana to move to Metropolis, since she's a demonic harpy who feeds on the unhappiness of those closest to her, and Lana tries to find a way to stay in Smallville, finally getting an invitation from Chloe to stay with her and her father. Clark tries everything he can, including running at top speed to Metropolis to intercept the top neurosurgeon, getting on an airplane to help Ryan. For a minute, he thinks this surgeon will be able to save Ryan's life, but ultimately, he only buys him a few days. Because Ryan always dreamed of having an aerodrome, the flying fortress of solitude of his favorite superhero warrior Angel, so he could get away from all of his problems, Clark braves his fear of flying and takes Ryan up in a hot air balloon, and perhaps the most touching and sincere scene of the whole series thus far. He finally takes the advice Lex gave him earlier, that he'll regret not spending those last moments of Ryan's life with him if he keeps trying in vain to save him, like Lex did with his mother when she was on her deathbed. Clark stands in the hall of the hospital, looking into Ryan's empty room as time slows to a crawl around him, and he really takes in this sad moment of the boy who he's come to see as his little brother, who he couldn't save even with all of his powers. Then credits. This is how you ought to do a follow-up episode. It builds on the ideas from Ryan's first appearance in Stray, but it's also better than Stray. A much smarter narrative that doesn't leave me scratching my head about how and why people do things. Ryan is still very likable, and a lot of that is because with all the curveballs life has to throw at him, he doesn't complain and he manages to retain his faith in people, even after so many have taken advantage of his gifts. The episode uses Ryan to focus on what Clark is capable of and the limitations of his abilities, and Ryan serves as a great device to give him the appropriate emotional motivation to be so proactive. Ryan represents for Clark all the things he's ever been afraid of happening to him growing up because of his gifts. First in Stray, it was Ryan's family taking advantage of his abilities, and here, it's Ryan being used as a lab rat, Clark's two greatest fears. He and Ryan, even more than in Stray, have developed a deep bond because of this that I really buy, and it makes it that much more tragic to see Ryan die at the end. Clark has always managed to hide his abilities from the public, besides some close calls like with Sam Phelan, Overland, and was fortunate enough to have parents like the Kints who respect what makes him different rather than exploiting that. And Clark and his parents have become what Ryan never had before, his family and his protectors. I love that Clark, the guy who has everything Ryan ever wanted, is able to give all that back to Ryan, but importantly, feels a real sense of mortality at the end when he can't ultimately save Ryan's life. It's bittersweet because you know Ryan dies happy. There's a tough lesson here for Clark that's learned in a natural and graceful way, and it's not heavy-handed. When he breaks Ryan out of Summerholt without thinking and brings the police to his farm with a warrant and nearly gets Lex in trouble with the law too, he realizes that just because he has all these amazing powers doesn't mean that he can solve any problems just by showing up, despite the number of problems in the show that seems to have been solved just by Clark showing up. How many instances of convenient unconsciousness are we up to now? 16? We've had so many episodes where people just dismiss events and details that don't add up related to Clark's miraculous saves for no other reason than the series needs Clark's secret to stay intact. But this episode is a lot smarter than that. Everyone's asking questions about both Clark and Ryan. Lex doesn't just ignore the fact that Clark shouldn't have been able to get in and out of a facility like Summerholt with a teenage boy, and as usual, Clark's a horrible liar. He says he was just lucky, I guess. Lex responds with, "You're the luckiest guy I've met." And Lex puts 2 and 2 together at the end and figures out that Ryan's telepathic. I'm glad people are acting a little more like real people this episode, and I really appreciate that this figures into the story. Clark realizes that things are more complicated than just busting in and saving the day. There are these pesky things called laws, and adults have custody over children, and if you take a child away from his legal guardian, police show up and you're likely to get arrested. The episode explores the limitations of Clark's powers in 2 ways. What he can and can't do because of society's rules, and what he can and can't do because of the rules of science. He acts very impulsively twice, but understandably. I'm not giving Clark any grief for his actions this episode at all. First, when he breaks Ryan out of Summerholt. And let's face it, Jonathan and Lex are both right when they say that he went about that the wrong way. At the very least, it wasn't a very strategic move. But on the other hand, what else was he going to do? The police couldn't even determine that Ryan was there. Not sure why they couldn't do a little research, figure out that this boy Clark keeps going on about, of whom they have a first and a last name, is legally in Garner's care, and force him to show them where this kid is so they can be sure he's not being mistreated. But like I said, the Metropolis PD are apparently idiots in this episode. The second impulsive thing Clark does is running off to find a neurosurgeon to try to save Ryan's life. One of these is presented as too rash, the other is presented as endearing. I like that Clark doesn't recede into himself as he often seems to, and decides that because he made one bad move, he can't do anything right, so he stops trying. I like him in this episode because his friend is dying and he refuses to give up. The second time he uses his powers is in kind of a risky way, but it's only a risk to himself, in that someone could see him using his powers as he runs hundreds of miles looking for this guy. And of course, it's still convenient that whenever he appears out of thin air when he runs fast, nobody seems to notice. But while he's figuring out the appropriate time to risk using his powers and when not to, he's also figuring out physical boundaries. I really love that when he's exhausted all of his possibilities, he listens to his friend rather than obsessively going on and spends those last moments with Ryan. I like a character who won't give up, but I also like a character who knows when it's time to quit. Now, those sound like contradictory traits, but a protagonist exhibits maturity when he can see the difference. He wasn't wrong when he went after the neurosurgeon, but to do anything after the surgery was tried would have been futile. The end of this episode reminds me a lot of Clark and Richard Donner's Superman losing his father on the farm to a heart attack he couldn't prevent. Fans sometimes complain that Superman is too powerful for us mortals to relate to. These are the moments that make Clark Kent a human being. Everything this episode accomplishes with Clark's character would have been undone if Ryan had lived at the end. The point is that he tries and he fails. Clark always wins, and seeing him lose, especially with a character like Ryan that I too don't want to see die, makes me appreciate everything he goes through that much more. This is the only episode of the show I can recall tearing up at the end. And I don't mind admitting I did it this time too. I like all the Warrior Angel stuff this episode. Again, it builds on this fictional comic book Ryan and Lex are both fans of from Stray, and it does more with it. There's a fantastic payoff for the aerodrome at the end with the hot air balloon. Ryan says he always wished he had a fortress to get away from his problems, and yes, there are tons of obvious Superman parallels. But I like that it isn't just a hot air balloon because the aerodrome flies, but also because it's being around people and reading all their minds that gives Ryan headaches. So being up in the clouds really does get him away from his problems. But like with everything, only for a while, because he's still going to die. He can escape for a minute, but in the end, he has to get down and face those problems. That subtle idea at the end of flying to get away but having to land at some point and face the complexities of reality is a great metaphor for Superman. It almost makes me okay with the idea of Clark being afraid of flying. Until now, I've seen that as just irony for the sake of irony, like so many things in the show, but it works here. Lex and Ryan's scenes are great here again. I like that Lex tries to explain how someone with good intentions can go bad, and Ryan telepathically knows Lex is on the same road. That look on Lex's face when Ryan tells him to remember that is gold. And my vote for character I'd most like to see jump on a bus and leave Smallville is doing just that. Nell, I will miss our time together. I will miss cursing your selfish, petty ways and your superficiality, and I'll miss having someone other than Lana to blame for everything stupid Lana does. But nevertheless, this is a hallelujah moment. And I hope you and the guy with a screw for his head are very happy together. I should also note that there are references to not one, but two fictional DC cities this episode, Edge and Hub City. I only bring that up because some people still wish that I would count blatant DC references, and I'm not doing that because there are too many to stay accurate, but I like to point them out when I can. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Warrior Angel #1 is the cover of Action #1. You're welcome. This one is really solid. Wow, 2 in a row. And everything negative I have to say is pretty minor. The subplot with the mayor is really shoehorned in there. The only thing that makes it fit with the rest of this material is the idea of children either being owned by their parents or going their own way, with Tate mentioning how Lionel has always been his supporter and Lex should follow suit, and Lex reminding him that LexCorp owns the plant and his father has nothing to do with the expansion. But other than that, they're well-acted scenes that play like what's being talked about is way more important and has broader consequences than it has. It's the cigarette-smoking man from X-Files manipulating local politics. Nice to see him again, but really, he's playing the exact same character and acting like buying the Smallville election is on the same level as covering up an alien conspiracy. The Lana subplot also has a weird air of self-importance. I do like the subtle way that story fits in here, though, with Lana looking into emancipation and trying to get away from her legal guardian, and Nell telling her she's a teenager and has no say in the matter. Garner tried the same thing with Ryan and did horrible experiments on him. Of course, I'm sure if Lana had superpowers, Nell would do the same thing, but I digress. We have differing degrees of the same problem. Adults taking advantage of the system to make their children do whatever they want. Maybe the best line in the episode is when Jonathan says, having custody of a child is not the same as having a pink slip to a car. Oh, and I like how Ryan's aunt gave him up because the hospital bills were too much for her, and Lana's aunt is trying to force her to go places she doesn't want to go to. Man, aunts suck in this show. Okay, everybody help me keep track. In the rest of Season 2 through Season 10, help me find a cool aunt. At the end, when Chloe reveals she and her dad want Lana to live with them, Lana says, "Did you ever see that one coming?" As if telling the audience, isn't this a really neat plot twist? And I'm like, no, why is that a big deal? It could be an interesting character dynamic, I guess, except this is still we don't know what to do with Lana territory, but it's played like it's the biggest twist of the season.
And questions to Astrel when I get to heaven. This is another ultra minor one, but how is issue 66 the rarest Warrior Angel issue there is? Lex's Warrior Angel #1, or Fantasy Comics #1, I guess, is a Golden Age issue published at the same time Action Comics #1 came out in 1938. Comics were considered disposable entertainment back then, and a lot of kids just tossed them when they were finished with them. So I'd figure that would be the rarest. It may be that Ryan is making a distinction between the Warrior Angel series and Fantasy Comics when he says this, but I'm not sure. It sounds like issue 66 is the rarest issue there is just because it's a key issue where a really important thing happens. That doesn't automatically mean there are fewer of them, unless the character fell way out of popularity and there was a low print run. And way later in the show, there's a Hollywood movie about Warrior Angel, so I doubt that's it. Lex even agrees with Ryan on its rarity and that it's because it contains a major story point. So it's not just a kid who doesn't understand what rare means. Oh, and get it? It's issue 66 because Devilikits turns against Warrior Angel in that issue and he's evil. You know, like Order 66 in Star Wars. Sixes are bad no matter how many there are.
On to the scoreboard. Once again, the really good episodes seem to have little to count. We have one instance of Clark and Lana in the loft, and we have one root superspeed exit when Clark runs off to talk to Dr. Burton after speaking with an attendant at the airport. I'm going to give Ryan a 4 out of 4. It's a Smallville episode that got me misty-eyed. How could I give it anything else? Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.